Ladies and gentlemen, the director of First Man, Damien Chazelle. Ryan Gosling. Claire Foy. Kyle Chandler. Corey Stoll. Patrick Fugit. And Olivia Hamilton. We're going to try to have a bit of a conversation, I think.
Thanks, Mom. Love you too.
Damien, I'd like to start off by asking you, this is both a very epic and a very intimate story, and I know that you shot different parts of the film on different stock. You used 16, 35, IMAX. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decisions of how you wanted to shoot the different parts.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky to work again with Lena Sandgren, who's just a brilliant cinematographer who shot La La Land with me and Ryan. And very early on, I mean, I think the one thing we knew for sure is that we wanted to try to approach a lot of the movie like a documentary and try to really stay true to the archival footage of the era, most of which was, I mean, it was the cameras they could physically bring onto the space capsule. So it was 16 millimeter cameras and a cinematography that had a messy verite style to it. That was really kind of what that authentic footage of space was at that time. So we wanted to stay true to that and try to, you know, find a way to make the camera feel like it was always sort of as close as possible to these actors. So that, you know, that meant kind of Linus operating himself, sort of getting right up in their faces a lot of the times and following them through rooms. And some shots were kind of pre-planned, others were total accidents. And we tried to just adopt that same style, whether it was home life or space life. And then go big when the movie felt like it needed to go big. So something like the moon, one thing I always heard when I talked to anyone when I was lucky enough to talk to people who had walked on the moon, they spoke about it as though it were like a waking dream, this sort of heightened reality, and this rush of adrenaline. They felt like they could see and hear everything at a clarity that they never experienced before. So that felt like it would be such a great kind of Wizard of Oz way to go from the lowest res sort of film format in many ways, 16 millimeter, other than 8 millimeter, to the highest that there is, IMAX, and to kind of build that transition into the emotion.
It's such an incredible accomplishment, having gone to the moon, and it's built a lot of there's a lot of mythology around this, and I know that this film takes a different perspective and really tries to break down some of that mythology around it. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your collaboration with the writer of the book, James Hansen, and screenwriter Josh Singer, and your kind of approach to telling this side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, the book, and I think the actors can speak to this as well. The book was this sort of Bible for all of us. It's an encyclopedic book, just packed with information about Neil, about the program. And then what Josh did that was so incredible, and he spent about 4 years doing this, was sort of carving a path through that dense thicket of material, kind of crafting a narrative that focused just on these 7 to 8 years immediately preceding the moon landing. We didn't want to look at what happened before. We didn't want to look at what happened after. We wanted to just look at that chapter in history, the actual step-by-step process by which this mission was accomplished, and tell that specifically through Neil and Janet's perspectives, and try to really be subjective to those. But it required a lot of research, and Jim and Josh, and then Ryan and Claire and everyone on stage here, as soon as they came on board, everyone kind of took the mantle of trying to do as much research as possible on our own.
Yeah, I'd love to open that up to everybody else about the research and the preparation, and maybe we can start with Claire and Olivia. Your characters were not as public maybe as some of the others, but obviously still very vital to how all of this happened, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the role in that sense.
Yeah, there wasn't really a lot known about them, and I think that's Jim's book is incredible and it's incredibly thorough. But I suppose I felt like Janet was the emotional kind of side of Neil. She tried, and so that wasn't really what was the story that everybody knew about Neil Armstrong, was his emotional side. And I think luckily, Josh's script was very, the women who were at home were as much a part of the story as the men who went off. But, a lot of the research, you do as much research as humanly possible, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it was a domestic circumstance. It felt so intimate, the scenes that we were filming. You can do as much research as you like, but ultimately you just have to be there and feel it and listen. And, we spent a lot of time together as a family. Which was vital, because we were, essentially, spending days on end with these children who had to like us, hopefully, and not be scared of us. And I hope we achieved that. But Olivia did exactly the same. You got so close to the kids.
Yeah, I think the most valuable thing I did to prepare for the role was I went to Dallas to meet with Bonnie White, now Bonnie Bear, the daughter of my character, and spoke with her son as well. And I know you guys talked to the Armstrong boys a lot, and I felt like that really helped me understand the specificity of what they went through, and gave the movie, I feel like, a lot of the realism and the life that you see, because we had all that support.
Ryan, I'd love to hear from you. This is a man that notoriously didn't like being in the public eye, and we've talked a bit about how this gets into his, I think, heart and mind and his personal life. And what was it like for you to play this role and work with the Armstrong family?
Well, it was an incredible opportunity, obviously, but it was a great responsibility. And, Neil was always synonymous with the moon to me. I think as soon as I learned what the moon was, I learned that someone named Neil Armstrong walked on it. But like the moon, I knew very little about him. And just what he said, just for all mankind, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And I always, it's such a beautiful thing to say. It might be the most famous thing ever said. And I just felt so lucky to get to know and try to get to know the type of person that would say something like that. And, he was very reserved and heightened professionalism, and some people described him as someone that was hard to know, but with the help of his family, and I had the opportunity to meet Janet as well, his sons, his friends. I've never had more help on a film in my life, and more people happy to help, because they were, it was his legacy, Janet's legacy, who they were, how they lived their lives, the sacrifices that they endured to make this impossible achievement a reality, to help to put a human being on the moon. Everyone really wanted us to get it right, and they were just so helpful, and they helped so much to help us contextualize and try and understand even just a few of the many layers of these people.
The details of the experience in NASA and the missions themselves feel very real and authentic, and I'm wondering, Kyle, Corey, and Patrick, if you can speak to your experience kind of with that side of making the film.
Well, I'll just agree with what everyone said. I mean, you've got real people that you're portraying, so you do have that sense of responsibility going into the film as an actor, and that's where you get your information from the research. And all of us had an immense amount of research given to us. So particularly speaking, you read the books on Deke Slayton. All these guys were bigger than life then, you know, as they are now. You've got so much information on the internet nowadays. But also there were people, I was able to sit at the table and have a dinner with people that knew them intimately. So that's the real great thing when you get that one story that gives you a piece of the humanity of the person you're playing, and then you're like, oh, okay, now I know how to maneuver in these little spots when you didn't before. And so that's a great gift. Usually when you're creating a character, you just don't have that. You go on your own, but that's not mine. But it might be my wife. But anyway, it was a wonderful process like that. And just like Ryan says, you know, honor to play these guys. I mean, the call comes for this one. It's like you get to be part of the greatest story never told. I mean, this is a good one. And the angle that it was it's just a great story. I'm really, you know, I get chills saying it, but I'm really happy to be standing here, be part of this. Yeah, it's big.
Yeah, I have to echo that sentiment. It was, you know, from the second I got the script and then spoke to Damien to, you know, going to Houston and you know, going through their space camp. I just felt so lucky. But in terms of the research, it was an embarrassment of riches. There's just so much that it can be like drinking from a fire hose. But one thing that I found really useful was just reading the depiction of the Apollo mission in Buzz's book, Magnificent Desolation, and in First Man, and in Mike Collins' book. The facts are all the same. You know, these guys were precise, and they were men of science. But it was almost like Rashomon. There were enough difference in perspective in each story that it made it really exciting to be able to tell the story from, you know, even though this is about Neil, to get my little bit of perspective in there.
Well, I think he had a big perspective,
I mean, Buzz, not mine.
Actually. Patrick, did you want to add anything about what this character was like to play for you? Obviously, this was, you know, a tragic, you know, story of his life, and.
Yeah, you know, I didn't know really anything about my guy, Elliot C., and there was very little in terms of practical material to research. Damien sent that stuff over, but surprisingly, what he sent over was a bunch of old documentaries about like door-to-door Bible salesmen in like the mid-'60s, and teachers and stuff like that. And they were all these glimpses into at the time, the modern American male, and how they went about their days and how they interacted with each other and that sort of thing. And it was clear pretty quickly that it was those relationships, those personal connections that Damien was going to be focusing on, particularly with Elliot and Neil. And you know, not knowing a lot about Elliot and the fact that he didn't get to do any actual space missions, and he passed pretty early on. It's awesome that the film highlights him in that way, and that you see it really through Neil's perspective. You know, there's a big shift in Neil's manner after Elliot is lost, and you know, as someone who spent a lot of time researching him, I appreciated that. You know, it's cool because I missed him too. You know, it's like when we were doing all the space stuff. It was like everybody had these mission patches and these plaques and everything, but Elliot wasn't around, you know, because he didn't do any of the missions. He didn't get that far. So it's cool that he's in the movie. You know, thanks for not cutting me out of it.
Damien, you obviously spent a lot of time ensuring that the details were as authentic as possible, and I think that really extends to the sound. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just like the sound design of the film and the choices you made.
Yeah, I mean, I was again, lucky to be working with the people I was working with. And this sort of carried through to all the departments, but sound was just a great example of it, where people, Ryan talked about this sort of feeling of responsibility. I think not just the cast, but everyone behind the camera felt this sort of responsibility, because especially there's so much material to draw from for research and reference. They felt the responsibility to get it right. And so this incredible team of sound designers, Eiling Lee and Millie Yatra Morgan, who I'd worked with before in La La Land, and then John Taylor and Frank Montano, who I hadn't worked with before, all of them just became these, Frank had always been a kind of space geek growing up, so he was like jumping at the gun right away to when he started working on this. Everyone else, by the end we were all sort of the resident space geeks, because it's the kind of world where as soon as you get a sliver of it, you just want to dive in more. So they started going to launches at the Capes, Falcon X launches, and rocket test sites in California and Nevada, Texas, to record thruster sounds and rocket sounds. They started gleaning through old Saturn V archival material. They got all the old spacesuits out. They got one of Neil's fellow pilots, Joe Walker's X-15 suit. They got that out and sort of inflated it up and did all the Foley sound with that, and same with one of the moonwalk suits. And they just kind of went to town because that material is there. It's there if you have the willpower and stamina to go for it, and they did.
Are there any animals you want to mention in the sound design?
Well, Ryan likes to. Ryan seemed very.
Don't put this on me, man. You put the hippos. You put the hippos in there. Tell
Ryan seemed troubled when I told him how many, how many non-space sounds are in these launches. I always loved finding out. When I was a kid, learning about movies and stuff, like, realizing that I forget which animal it is. I think it might be. Rhinoceroses that you hear in certain sequences in Raging Bull. I just thought that was so cool that, who would think to put animal sounds in a boxing match? So we tried to take that to the umpteenth degree. So you have about every animal, that would be a Noah's Ark is reflected in the sounds that you hear during these sequences. But then there's also musical instruments. There's also, sounds of mortar explosions and gunfire. Part of what's so fun about sound, and what I loved working with these people, what I loved about working with them was, yes, there's the research and the accuracy on one hand. You want to be true to the facts, but then of course you also want to create a sensory experience, because an audience doesn't get to actually ride in the capsule into space. So you want to try to make it feel like that. It's not just about the literal reality, it's the emotional reality. And so that's where you try to start being creative and trying to mix in, animal sounds or other sounds that you wouldn't actually literally hear, but maybe it gives you that feeling that you could feel when you have that amount of thrust and G's behind you hurtling you into space.
I know that you tried to do as much in camera as possible and minimize the use of visual effects, and I'm wondering, particularly Corey and Ryan, if you can talk a little bit about what that meant for those scenes for you.
Well, it was a learning curve, because it was slower, at least at first, than using green screen, because we had to time what we were, as we were getting closer to the moon, it had to correspond with what was on the screens in front of us. So it didn't make our job easier, but I think in terms of the process of it, but in terms of the acting, there was no acting to be done, because we were looking at the moon, we were gazing up at this magnificent, perspective on the moon that no humans had ever had before. That's what we're looking at. So it was an incredible opportunity to avoid faking it.
Yeah, I think it's just to Damien's credit, and it speaks to whether it's hippo sounds in the launches, or it's not having a green screen, even though you easily could, and most people would. The amount of time it took to get that right and to coordinate it with the shot was very time consuming, and of course as actors it was a pleasure, because you don't have to pretend that, you know, these things that are unimaginable are happening, and it's a gift to us, but it was also to the crew as well, because everyone then on set was experiencing it too. It was a constant reminder of the scale at which, you know, these people were working, and it was, I think Damien did everything in his power to leave no stone unturned or to take any, you know, shortcut. It's just watching him pull his hair out all day over the timing of these LED productions was just a testament to how he was just going to do everything in his power, whatever it took, to make this as real as possible. And I think it was inspiring for all of us, and that worked its way into everyone's work. So.
Claire, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. You really are such, you know, the emotional heart of the film in many ways. Can you maybe talk about what was one of the more challenging scenes that you filmed?
Oh God, I mean, I think Janet wasn't she wasn't an overly emotional person. And the dynamic of their relationship wasn't necessarily based in that, I think. So it was about finding the reality of these two different personalities and how they lived together and what attracted them to each other and how they worked together as a family. And I think they really did work very well together. I mean, we did the scene where I, you know, have a massive go at him and tell him he's just can't go to the moon without talking to his children, was really hard. But just because it was challenging, because it wasn't so much about getting it right, it was just about, you know, making sure that it mattered. You know, it really mattered. It really mattered to her. And I really felt like, you know, she never, you know, she was supportive and she loved him and she did her very best all the time. And I think it just got to the point where she just couldn't do it anymore. And so I really went into that scene thinking, I've got to give it to him. But we had to do, that was also about doing it together and not being actors and really enjoying just sort of going, you know, saying a swear word, and just, you know, being angry. It's about, you know, the reality of when you're in that circumstance that you don't want to say the wrong thing as much as you want to say the right thing. And ultimately her goal was to look after her children. It wasn't about her, you know, having a go at him. But it was really difficult and exhausting, but really great. It's like that perverted thing of being an actor that you're really happy that you feel really terrible at the end of the day. But I did feel really happy that I felt awful.
You even bled for that scene.
I bled. I cut myself, guys, on the briefcase. It's like my proudest achievement.
Damien, maybe just one final question for you. The editing achievement in this film, I think, is just like another incredible thing that you've done, and the mission control sequence stands out to me as something that would have been very challenging to put together. There's just so much happening, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about maybe that scene or others and what that was like to put together.
Yeah, I mean, the editor I work with, Tom Cross, I've worked with since for several films now, and yeah. I don't think I could do anything without him. Yeah, he's really, with this, I mean, and Mission Control is an example of this, we shot a lot, you know, because of this documentary style shoot, and we knew that we were gonna shoot the script, but we were also gonna shoot beyond that. For Mission Control, for instance, we wanted it to just be a documentary event, that we'd be in there with a couple cameras and just sort of fishing and finding, and so, but that meant that every flight desk, every flight controller had to, if the camera was going to suddenly be on Guido or Fido or Flight Surgeon, they all had to have something to say at that moment that, you know, wasn't just, you know, sometimes in Walla, you know, in scenes where you have kind of Walla in the background, they'll just have people say, I don't know, they say, you know, they just say blah, 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 just so their lips are moving. And here it was kind of important because we didn't know exactly where the camera would land or where the mics would land. So everyone was mic'd. There were 24, I think, channels of audio, and everyone had their own script. So it was kind of a 70 pages of additional dialogue just for the mission to kind of go through for each of them. And it was a lot of fun to shoot, but I think it was an absolute nightmare, I have to imagine, for Tom and his team to kind of process that footage coming in. But I remember seeing some of the rough cuts of that, and just, again, what was amazing to me about Tom is that, and what I love working with him, one of the reasons I love working with him is that it's kind of how I love to work too, where you try to be as precise as possible and lean into, when you can, lean into the fun stuff of cinema, the sort of the magic of it, the sometimes editing that's a showcase of editing. That can be really kind of fun type of cinema to make. But especially in this movie, you needed to have that sort of baked into a total reality, just a sort of this veneer of total verisimilitude where it seems like actually things weren't edited, where it just seems like, well, this is just what happened and we captured it and it's all in the can. And that's a really delicate balancing act that I think he was sort of uniquely equipped to handle.
Well, congratulations, everybody, again. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for staying.
Thank you.
Thank you.